World Alzheimer's Day is fast approaching, an important time to shine a light on the disease that impacts millions of families all over the world, and of course right here at home. It's also time to talk about the rising hopes in the fight against Alzheimer's and dementia. So, let's go on the record.
From WPBF 25, this is On the Record with Todd McDermott.
Alzheimer's is not only a medical challenge, but also an emotional one, affecting patients, their caregivers, and loved ones. Sometimes one and the same. World Alzheimer's Day is September 21st, a day to raise awareness, support people living with the disease, and highlight the progress being made toward treatment and hope for the future. Joining me now is Cindy Moorer, who has been a caregiver for her husband, Charlie. Let's talk first about the journey that you and Charlie have been on, when it started and how it has progressed. How long ago was it when he was diagnosed?
6 years ago.
And he was how old?
59,
Which
60. Yeah.
Which I think that age alone shocks people.
Yeah, it shocked us both. It was a really tough thing to hear, but I saw things happening with him, so I wasn't actually totally surprised when the neurologist told us, yes, he has early onset dementia.
Well, let's talk about that, because this is such an important part of our discussion today, is knowing and early diagnosis. In your case, I'm sure people would want to know what you saw and at what point the light went on that let's go see a neurologist.
Well, my husband wasn't the type of man that didn't pay attention to me, or when people talked, and he seemed distracted. And he was sort of a beat behind, as I put it. I could say something and then maybe 10 minutes later he would ask me that question. So I knew something was going on. I wasn't sure exactly. So first step was to go to the PCP. And she said, well, you need to see a neurologist because they will make the diagnosis and get an MRI, etc. But
what were you thinking going in? What were you and Charlie thinking?
I was more worried than he was. He was thinking, I'm fine. Even today he'll say, I'm good, I'm fine. If you ask him how he is, I'm fine. Yeah.
Were there other symptoms that you noticed before or right after the diagnosis?
Sometimes he would forget things, but he would always forget his phone and his wallet, but it seemed to be happening more often, and I would create a space on the table for him, put your wallet here, and even I put a sign there, wallet, phone, keys, but he seemed to not, it wasn't computing, let's say.
And we talked about the fact that he was so young and still is so young. When that was presented to you as a young onset of dementia, Alzheimer's, what did you know about that?
Well, my mother had it, but I would say at a normal age, an older age.
How old was she?
She was 82, and Charlie's mother had it at 78. So they were all, I don't want to say normal age, but older age, where it happens more frequently than younger. So I really became overwhelmed because we had a business, I was still working, he was still working. It was really hard, all the things that I knew were going to happen that I had to do. So I tried to always be one step ahead. You
were running the business and loving your husband, and also you were his caregiver.
Yeah.
And how did that progress over time, Cindy?
It's difficult. It's every stage and step of this journey has been difficult. He's in a facility now, and that's difficult. He still knows who I am, and I'm grateful for that, and I hope that continues. But every single change from this disease that I witnessed with him has been really difficult.
So he's in his mid-60s now. At what point and how did you decide that a facility would have to be the key here?
It was becoming a safety issue. He was starting to wander. He kept opening the front door and going out, and he would walk very fast, and I couldn't catch up to him. He was starting to have sleeping issues where he was waking up during the night and walking and wandering. I had all sorts of bells and whistles in the house so I could hear it. And he didn't know how to turn the TV on, and I had to have Seinfeld on an endless loop. I still do. But this was at like 4 in the morning that I had to put it on because that's what time, so his sleep was becoming interrupted. It was just getting worse.
How have you two approached this since that time 6 years ago?
In the beginning, I talked to him about it. I said, there's going to come a day where I'm not going to be able to take care of you anymore. And he said, I know. And I'm not really sure what he knows, and I don't really discuss it in that way anymore with him. I bring lunch and I put on my happy face, even if, my heart's breaking when I go in there. because I got to be there for him.
Yeah, I can't imagine, and I'm sure people relate to that. And I do think that it's important to present the story of a caregiver, because you're not just the wife, you're the caregiver too, and you're dealing with both.
Yes.
How have you taken care of yourself during this time?
Everybody asks me that.
They want to know, because they care about you and Charlie.
Yeah, I try to get enough sleep because I know that if I get burnt out, it's not good for him and it's not good for me. So I try to maintain predictable schedules. I get into bed at the same time at night and try to eat healthy, try to exercise. I'm just trying to do the things that keep me going for him and for me as best I can.
I want to see if we could end on a positive note. I know how difficult this is, and I thank you so much for sharing this story. Are there words of comfort, of hope, and of encouragement you want to give to people who have become or may become caregivers to their loved ones?
Well, there are a lot of drugs and research happening now. I'm so glad they're shedding a light on it. Just if it happens early onset, there's lots of programs available. There's daycare. There's all sorts of things. And you may become overwhelmed by all the paperwork, but call the Alzheimer's Association. Call your friends. Start as best you can. You need all the support you can get. And I'm here. Contact me too.
Well, we thank you again so much for sharing your journey with us. It means so much to people out there. And as we said, you're raising awareness.
That's my goal.
Wish you happiness going forward.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Cindy Maurer. Well, coming up, we talk with a mental health expert about the drain put on the disease, what it puts on loved ones, and how they push through. That's when On the Record returns.
You're watching On the Record on WPBF 25.
Welcome back. Joining me now is Dr. Raphael Wald with the Marcus Neuroscience Institute, which is part of Baptist Health. Doctor, thanks for coming back to speak with us about this. Let's talk, because we just talked to Cindy Maurer, about the physical, emotional, mental impact on caregivers. Because when people discuss dementia, discuss Alzheimer's, that is not the first thing that comes to mind. It's the patient. But let's talk about the impact and how important it is to deal with that.
Yeah, the incidence of dementia in caregivers is much, much higher than it is in the general population. There's a portion of that we can't really control. It's just going to take a toll emotionally. Even if you're a really great caregiver and you do a great job caring for yourself, it's still going to take a toll. But especially for those people who don't have the resources or the wherewithal to know how to care for themselves, it takes an even greater toll.
All right, so let's address it right now. I mean, Cindy talked a little bit about it, but what are the first or most important steps you need to take as a caregiver to keep yourself together?
You need human help, right? So you need other people. It takes a village to help with this sort of an issue. It's not something that one person can manage by themselves. Unfortunately, a lot of people are in the position where they have to manage it by themselves. They don't have any other option, but you need time for yourself. Exercise is probably the second most important thing after having human contact and human help from other people around you. But exercise is really crucial for both your cognitive and your mental health, and you just generally need time away with other people that you can relate to. I think it's helpful to be part of a support group, other people that are in the same position that you're in, so you can kind of understand that you're not the only person that's going through the same thing.
And let's say you have a spouse who is going through this and you are the caregiver. Is it possible that the caregiver just forgets to take care of themselves because they're so focused on their loved one?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you're busy caring for a person all day, it's very, very easy to forget to take care of yourself. I mean, for those of you that have had children, I mean, we all know that, when you're caring for someone else, you take a back seat because you care so much about that person. So it can be a very similar thing when you're caring for someone that has dementia, is that you're so focused on them and you're so focused on their quality of life that you just completely neglect to take care of yourself because you forget to.
Can we shift back a minute to some of those signs we need to look for? Because Cindy talked about what she initially spotted. I know that it's very easy for people to want to dismiss some of the signs. Can we talk a little bit about what people need to look out for, and when is the moment that, yes, you should be going to see a neurologist?
Sure, definitely. I think it's important just to note here, remember that dementia is really an umbrella term that means a person has had has had significant changes in their thinking skills, their memory, and their other thinking skills, and that Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia. So specifically when we're talking about Alzheimer's disease, the hallmark of early Alzheimer's disease is short-term memory loss. So what people will notice is that their loved one will repeat statements, they'll misplace items. What's also very common is word-finding difficulties. They'll notice that their loved one has a hard time coming up with names of movie stars that they know very well, or just have a hard time coming up with words that they want to use in common conversation. So with Alzheimer's disease, really the hallmark is short-term memory loss and word-finding difficulties. But again, there's a number of other causes of dementia, like vascular dementia, dementia due to alcohol abuse, among many, many others. So really the bottom line is if you're concerned about a loved one's thinking skills in any way, there's been some kind of a change in their language, in their ability to understand language, in their ability to remember things, in their personality, right? There are some forms of dementia where changes in personality, disinhibition or anger or apathy are the earliest signs of that dementia. So really any major changes in a loved one's personality or thinking skills are the things that you want to be looking for.
All right, what about self-testing? And what about things we can do when it comes to keeping sharp? I know that people hear this and say, it's not going to happen to me. It isn't that simple, obviously, but what are some ways you should be testing yourself and maybe ways you can try to keep as sharp as you can before a diagnosis like this?
Sure, absolutely. So a lot of people ask me, what's the best thing to do? Should I be reading? Should I be doing crossword puzzles? And these are really good questions. But the truth is, if you're only going to take one thing away from this entire interview and you're only going to do one thing, it's walk or bike, or your cardiovascular health will have a greater impact on reducing your risk of developing dementia than doing crossword puzzles every day. So if you're going to just do one thing and you're going to just remember one thing that I say, is to get some kind of cardiovascular exercise. It doesn't mean you have to be elevating your heart rate to the absolute extreme, but you need to elevate it somewhat. So, a 30-minute walk, even if it's sort of a light to moderate kind of a pace, that's the sort of thing that you're going to want to be doing. And exercise, taking care of your heart, and all the other things that you are supposed to be doing to take care of your heart anyways, like managing blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, thyroid disease. Those are the things that make the biggest difference. And then after that, for my money, if you're reading books with plots, you're forcing yourself to follow a plot. That's important. It makes your mind work, and reading is very, very good for your mind as well.
I have about a minute left. Can we address real quickly the initial testing that you would undergo if you went to a neurologist because you had a possible diagnosis in your mind? What would you go through right to start?
Sure, absolutely. So when you go to a neurologist, generally they'll take a history from you and they'll do a brief screen of your thinking skills. A lot of times it's a test that might have 10 or 15 items and scored out of 30 points just to get an idea of where you are and if there's a possibility that there have been some changes. But then a neurologist, as a set of typical tests that would be the standard of care, will send a patient for blood work, brain imaging, and neuropsychological testing, which is what I do. So the neuropsychological testing is more of an in-depth testing to really isolate people's different thinking skills and get an idea statistically if there's been a major change, and if so, what's causing it. So based on the brain imaging, based on the blood work, and based on the information gained from the neuropsychologist, the neurologist can then, after all of those tests have been completed, can give the patient a proper diagnosis.
All right, Dr. Raphael Wald, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for coming in and for all the information. Next, we're going to look at how to lower the risk of dementia and Alzheimer's as well as the treatments. It's Dr. Peter Glebus, the Director of Cognitive and Behavioral Neurology at Marcus Neuroscience Institute, which again is affiliated with Baptist Health. Doctor, thanks for being here.
Sure.
We talked with Charlie Moore's wife, caregiver for a long time, Cindy, earlier. But we've talked about the fact that he was so young at 59. Can you tell us what that is called, the correct way to refer to that, as well as what you see when someone of that age? We just don't connect these brain illnesses with people of that age.
Sure. So anybody who develops a disease and they're younger than 65, we call young onset. And young onset, probably 10% of all Alzheimer's patients are young onset patients. Most frequently, these patients also present very similarly like a later onset Alzheimer's disease with a forgetfulness, with the language problems. But we can see also different presentations in these patients, behavioral problems, problems with the navigation, significant mood problems. That wasn't the case with Charlie, and I saw Charlie when it wasn't the very beginning. I saw Charlie, he was already in 5 to 6 years into the disease. But he presented himself initially very, very well, as many Alzheimer's disease patients do. But when you start talking more, when you start testing, that's when you start seeing the problems.
Can we address that just for a second? Because I have just a little bit of personal knowledge of this with my mother, who is in her 80s. She has since passed away. But when she was diagnosed with the early stages of dementia, we were all shocked. And apparently she had been taking a lot of steps to hide it. I don't know how many were conscious and how many were unconscious, but there is that line though where they adapt and we may not even see some of these signs.
So that's very frequent. We frequently, especially when it's our loved ones, somebody didn't come up with a word or they forgot something. It's age or similar problem. But when it starts becoming more repetitious, when it starts becoming problematic, then that's where we have to look into that. Especially if when the spouses live together, they start doing things for another, and many times if one spouse dies, and then the children start seeing because other spouse was compensating. So we see these scenarios very frequently.
Now, in Mr. Moore's case, he did have to end up in a facility after Cindy had cared for him for a number of years. Where is the line drawn on home care versus somebody has to go into a full-time care facility?
It's always a balance. It's a balance because on one side there is a patient, and on the other side there are loved ones, the caregivers. So we always have to take care of both, especially in more advanced stages. Because if the caregiver breaks, then we have actually two patients on our hands, and it's always very personal.
It's an interesting term when the caregiver breaks.
Yes, because
so much pressure on them.
Yeah, so much pressure, and so much unseen pressure. We see these people in the office for half an hour, and that's it. They are in that for 24/7. So there is a lot of pressure. And that's a very personal decision, and to make. And we can guide people, but the decision will be always theirs.
Can we go back to younger onset dementia and Alzheimer's diagnoses? Are we seeing more diagnoses because the tools are better for diagnosis, or is there some other factor?
Probably both. I think now we have tools. We actually can diagnose reliably Alzheimer's disease in the living person, but also our is probably getting worse. So we're seeing more and more young people that are getting diagnosed. And lifestyle, I'm talking sedentary lifestyle, cardiovascular disorders. Dr. Wald was mentioning how important is cardiovascular health. So we definitely, and people are also more open to come and get evaluated.
I've got to ask you about the prospects for the use of GLP-1 medications. Diabetes medication, control blood sugar. Now it's changed the lives of millions as a weight loss drug. Are there prospects where this might be something that could be applied to plaque in the brain or something in terms of how these brain diseases progress?
We will see. It doesn't work directly on the plaque. What we do know that diabetics who don't have cognitive problems, when they're taking this medication, that they're a lower risk of developing dementia in the future compared to the ones who don't take. That we know. It's also being studied right now in people who actually already have cognitive problems. In people with Alzheimer's disease, we don't know that. We're waiting for the results. Again, these medications are not completely without side effects, so we have to be a little bit careful, not as liberal prescribing for reasons that are not indicated.
Sure. Dr. Peter Glebas, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
For your work and for joining us today. We'll be right back. Thank you so much for joining us today. As always, we encourage you to be part of our discussion. That's each and every Sunday. We're always right here at 10 a.m. Until the next time, you can watch this morning's On the Record program and every episode we've done on our website, WPBF.com, and on our free WPBF 25 News app. We hope you have a wonderful Sunday. See you again next week.